Afternoon, everyone. Got a couple people sort of straggling in. If you can't hear my audio, go ahead and send something out in the chat window, but I believe that we should be good to go. So relatively short in terms of presentation, actual presentation. We're trying to do something a little bit different here as far as Q&A, just sort of taking the opportunity to do it speed dating style. So we're calling it Cupid's Q&A, but it's Cupid's Security Q&A. Our marketing folks wouldn't allow me to wear my Cupid outfit. I had thought that I was going to be able to do a sash, no shirt, maybe a little bit of a crown and bow and arrow, but apparently there's a weapons policy here at the building. I'm not allowed to bring my bow and arrow. Walking in, doing a webinar without a shirt on and only a sash was frowned upon, and wasn't able to get any other decoration. So I've chosen to instead eat candy in preparation for this Q&A. And hopefully I'll be able to ask or answer some questions that folks may have. To get it kicked off, one of the things that I wanted to do was really just bring sort of a topic to the forefront. Some of the things that I know everyone's kind of been hearing about, but maybe people aren't okay in opening questions or starting off on. But really, the format of this is for people to be able to ask any question that they might have around security and for us to be able to answer that. So for this one, you get me, Ron Schlecht. I'll be able to answer some questions. Like I said, just one slide that I have to kind of go through exactly one of the things that I see as an issue that we're facing in security, and then hopefully that'll kick off a couple different questions. For us, one of the things that has always been a little bit of a concern and has kind of grown throughout the past few years is the fact that we do have this pretty big talent shortage. So when we talk about what we're seeing from a service provider standpoint, it just continues to get worse and worse. And I think we've been kind of working off of a deficit for a number of years in terms of talent, but we're not really sure how to fix that. When we look at how fast our industry is changing, we have to, give a little bit of a head nod or a hat nod to the fact that, what we're doing in cybersecurity is definitely a mix of the technology, the process, and the people. I think, a lot of people kind of point to that in technology overall, but in security, there's definitely an exclamation point on that. With that said, one of the things that I had pointed out was that we're working off of a deficit. And right now, some of the statistics are a little bit staggering in terms of unfilled roles. Right now, there's an estimate that there's about 1.5 million unfilled roles in security, and the projections just continue to grow over the next 3 years. So I know we get a lot of questions from our prospective clients and then our current clients as well as, how are you finding people? We also get a lot of clients that ask us if we know of any recruiters that are good and that can find people easily, or that specifically recruit for security. And the fact is that we struggle with the same things as a vendor. We're trying to hire the people not only for the offensive security things that we do in terms of penetration tests and vulnerability assessments, but then also the people that are good enough to understand some of the compliance issues and regulatory drivers that we have to think about. In addition to that, and kind of on the flip side, we do need a lot of folks on the defensive security position, or that side, because we do have our managed security service, Radar, and then we also do a lot of incident response. So it's very interesting for us to be able to recruit from, a big talent pool right now, or people that purport to have security experience, but may not actually have it. Our struggle is, access to that pool. So being a relatively small service provider, how do we attract those folks that a lot of people are out there trying to get? And I think it's, just basically the size of the company, and then also our vision and our goal for what we want to do. But tapping into that and kind of looking at the bigger industry problem, what can we do and how can we affect it, being the company or the size of the company that we are, and actually move the industry forward? There's a couple different thoughts around that, because it's not just finding personnel, but it's finding competent personnel, which is kind of difficult. For us, we have turned to external recruiters. external recruiters can be great because they're able to take that personnel focus and find the right people, right? It's making sure that we get the right people for the job, and that there's a little bit of a focus on trying to hire those people. For better or for worse, there's a lot of recruiters out there. Some of them better than others. Unfortunately, it's kind of like us finding our own vendors, right? So people find security vendors, and you find good ones, and you find bad ones, or solution vendors. It's the same way in hiring recruiters. The toughest part of it, or the toughest pill to swallow, is the fact that they do have increasing fees. So anybody that's been around for a number of years, I'd say more than 7 years in IT, it's kind of recognize the fact that these waves and kind of the recruiting fees that go along with IT recruiting go up and down. It seems like we're a little bit on the upswing right now, and we've seen external recruiting fees reaching 20, 25, 30%, where when it was a little bit more competitive in that market, we saw fees down to 15% on top of salary. So we're always looking at how to supplement that. I never mind using external recruiters, just because then we have somebody to focus on particular hires that we're trying to make. But in addition to that, I think there's really a big push to get involved in different areas and sort of an overall industry focus on what folks are doing. For us, there's two different components of that. And one is being engaged with a lot of the colleges, universities, and technical institutes, whether they be a boot camp or like a SANS organization more online. And really not really trying to drive any content or do any sponsoring, but enabling folks who want to get involved in those types of re-education, maybe IT professionals that have a security background, but or have an IT background, but need a little bit more enhancement or need some enhancement on the security side, finding ways to be able to sponsor those individuals or give them the opportunities, and then also finding ways to be more involved with those organizations so that we can tap into some of the good graduates that are coming out of those programs. In addition to that, one of the things that we've started to do a little bit more recently is sponsorship to some of those younger folks. There's a surprising amount of people that don't really understand that cybersecurity is or can be a career choice. Some people think that a lot of it is really just government sponsored, whereas there's a larger private industry around cybersecurity than there is in the public industry. So getting involved with those organizations, most notably the CyberPatriot program through the Air Force, which actually runs and kind of focuses on education and competition for cybersecurity professionals at a very young age. These are high school kids who have learned and basically have gone through a program, typically sponsored through a junior ROTC or a junior military program, where they're essentially getting into these competitions. There's a pretty good amount of education that goes into something like that. They get a lot of background and good experience in terms of what they're doing, and then they go to competitions. So they go to state competitions, regional competitions, and then also at the national level. And that's what we've seen in universities and colleges as well. There's typically computer science clubs or computer science security clubs, whatever it may be, that get essentially gather around this particular topic, also study up and then focus on doing these competitions, whether they be actually attacking or defending or, essentially just hardening a network and kind of defending it. So there's all of that, but I think it's all kind of, building into the fact that we're going to be able to overcome the talent shortage, but it's not going to happen quickly. So there's a number of things that, even an organization of our size tries to do in terms of immediate hiring and supplementing it with not just our network connections, but then also the recruiters, but then also thinking a little bit longer down the line for recruiting and starting to target and kind of look at programs outside of just the typical recruiting and making sure that we're developing people who are kind of instrumental or hopefully instrumental in how people view cybersecurity. So that's just kind of my thoughts on it. That's probably going to continue to grow. I know that there's always been questions about what people should be doing and what they're focused on. but this is kind of my starting topic. It's a Q&A session, but at the same time, I wanted to kind of kick it off just because I know typically people don't jump into a Q&A session right away with questions, maybe kicking it off with a little bit of a topic. And we're going to kind of continue on down this. So we're going to do this Q&A 2 more times throughout the month, basically every Wednesday, coming back and kind of hitting on what I'd like to think of as a little bit of a different pillar or a problem that we're kind of facing overall in the industry, and then do that Q&A with folks. So with that said, if there are any questions, I know there's a couple comments, private comments already. Candy stipends, that's a good way to do hiring, quite honestly, but I think that's only to keep managing partners happy. We definitely have a nice candy stash here at the offices, which continues to grow and keep us occupied, but it also can sometimes drain your energy as you hit the candies in the middle of meetings and such, and then hit that sugar low on the back end of that. So here's the point where you guys can ask questions. I know there's enough people in there for questions. Here we go. The first one: what skills should I focus on to be a penetration tester? Okay, so kind of keeping along the talent shortage. Penetration testing is kind of tough because you can get there from so many different paths, right? It's not just a job where you learn to make the widget and as many widgets as you can make. That's how it works, but it really is more about critical thinking and being creative than it is around learning one specific set of technologies. With that said, trying to be a problem solver isn't a skill set that you can kind of go out and really learn. I always look at, when we do these hiring events or when we're at a conference and there are a number of people around, and we definitely have some folks that are looking for jobs. It's always the people that end up coming back to us and playing with the toys that we have on our conference tables. And a lot of times we'll bring puzzles or whatever it may be. And I know when we do recruiting events at colleges or universities, it's always those folks who we end up having good conversations with. So it is definitely about having a little bit of a critical thinking mindset, but at the same time, developing your skill set, a broad enough technology skill set to be able to go through and actually figure out what the problems are. The people that are more IT generalists that have an inch of knowledge but a mile wide do fairly well. But the people that really are the tinkers, the folks that actually understand and kind of know exactly how the different technologies work, whether that be networks or applications or desktop components, whatever it may be, are the people that we seem to see as being very, very good at penetration testing, right? They understand that the technology is set up to do any specific thing, or is usually set up to do a specific thing. And then as a penetration tester, it's really about manipulating that technology to, act in a different way or make it do what you want it to do. So just kind of understanding that the technology is binary, right? It's meant to do a specific thing, but you're able to manipulate it or get around it. And sometimes it's just a matter of figuring out how it works and then kind of taking it apart and going from there. Another question, do you think recruiters are doing a good job? I don't know. It's varying, right? We have, just as an example, we have, probably 10 recruiters that we use in various geographies. The geographies that we cover are, Philadelphia, Chicago area, and then also Austin, Texas. We kind of keep our hiring to those areas unless it's a very specific need, and then cover nationally. So a lot of people do travel in the positions that we have on the delivery side. But the recruiters, it's been interesting from location to location. In Philadelphia, we have a little bit more of the general recruiter feel. They're doing IT recruiting and then can kind of offshoot and do some security recruiting. And they've been fairly successful. We have one or two in the Philadelphia area that we're very comfortable with. We can give them a job rec, and they usually ask a bunch of questions. And then based off of the feedback that they get from us in terms of whether it's a good fit or not, that helps them kind of narrow it down. And then we do have some folks that have been very specific security, information security or cybersecurity recruiters. Those I've been a little bit more wary of because they do have supposedly a focus on cybersecurity, but the feel of it is that they're much more generic, right? They're still doing that IT recruiting, and they're trying to fit a need. They're just kind of jumping into the cybersecurity trends, right? They're essentially just slapping their name on cybersecurity and saying, we're specific cybersecurity recruiters. So mixed reviews on those. I can't say that we haven't been successful in using them. We actually have been very successful in using them because they seem to be tapped in and have access to a very large talent pool. But that's probably it. If they're telling job applicants that they're specifically focused on cybersecurity, of course, folks are going to want to work with them as opposed to the regular IT recruiters. The only thing that I haven't liked in working with them is that even though it's an outsourced solution or really, like a managed service, and they're, trying to find you the right folks, there's still a lot of work on our end as employers, right? So we still do a lot of the pre-screening parts. We still have a little bit of the a little bit of that pain associated with trying to do recruiting. What I was hoping for and what I'd really like to see over the next few years is recruiters kind of helping you build those job recs. So much of what we do, especially in a company of our size, is kind of trying to find those purple squirrels. And unfortunately, we end up listing way too many qualifications. And I think sometimes, sometimes it's, just basically throwing everything out there and seeing who you can get to apply for the position and then talking to them about their experience and really seeing what might fit in the organization. So that kind of answers that. And there was one comment on here from somebody. Many recruiters routinely submit resumes of unqualified applicants, materially modify applicants' resume. Yeah, I mean, it's weird because they're still kind of like that body shop, right? We still have recruiters that we can point out that are still just trying to match a person to the position for that 30% fee or that 25% fee. Our process is, pretty straightforward. We don't add too much to the hiring process, but this is the reason why I think it's important to do those phone pre-screens for folks. So, for us, when we get a resume in, it may match up, and then that next step is the phone pre-screen. And a lot of that is really just to make sure that the resume is factually accurate, and that what's on there matches what this person has done or does. And then the other part is to really make sure the position is exactly what they want out of it, and to see what other interests that they have. I always kind of say, is it going to be a organizationally or kind of like fundamentally, is it going to be a good fit? Are you going to fit into the organization just in your style and sort of culturally? And those are pretty important questions for a company like us. Culturally, you need to be able to fit in, and we find that that's a big part of our success right now. And then the second part is, can you do the job, which goes back to the resume and the skills that are on that. And then the third part is, what do you want to do in this position? If it's, I want to be a worker bee for the rest of my life, unfortunately, that doesn't fit really well with our company right now. We need folks, and it's kind of the cultural, sort of that cultural piece. We need folks who are going to be able to not only do the job, but be able to do some critical thinking and continue to expand what we do. So that's kind of my comment back to that. So a couple other questions, I'll kind of scroll to them to make sure that I'm hitting them all, or I'll try to hit them all as much. All right, we have one off-topic question. It's all I hear about lately is GDPR, GDPR, and GDPR. If we do not do any business in EU, why should I care about GDPR? I mean, right now, it's highly unlikely that anybody is doing or doesn't have some reason to at least understand GDPR, right? Even if you aren't doing any business in the EU. The biggest thing that I can say here is we've worked with a lot of clients where as they were doing their GDPR readiness, they had to make that decision, you know, are we a company who cares about or needs to care about GDPR? Do we do enough business in the EU that it would be material to our company? And we have had, you know, a number of organizations that essentially said, well, we just don't want to do business with anybody in the EU, or we're essentially going to purge them from our internal systems or not store any of that information so that we don't have to worry about it. That's a business decision, right? It could be business affecting in a negative way. However, it's a business decision in the other way as well, right? You're averting that risk, essentially not holding any of that information. However, I think the biggest thing that we can kind of look at in terms of GDPR is the fact that we're changing, or GDPR really changed or is changing the way that we view personal information and how it needs to be handled. So while it may be focused on the EU right now, I think what you're going to see is that more of these personal privacy issues and, you know, how personal information is handled is going to continue to creep through the rest of the world. And I think you're going to see this more in the United States as the years continue to move along. I know people are kind of up in arms about it. But you know, you wonder how quickly they'll be able to get over these data breaches. And I know, you know, historically, people have kind of gotten over them relatively quickly. But at the same time, there's more awareness about them. People are actually starting to take notice to the fact that their personal information is being used to make more money. So, you know, when you're Facebooked, right, and your information is then sold to do more marketing or whatever it may be, you start to feel a little bit dirty and feel like you've been used because, you know, you're not actually a consumer of Facebook. You've become the product, and they're using your information to transact and actually make more money off of it. You know, we just saw recently, just within the past week, how the information that was basically collected and stored through 23andMe is being used, right? It's being sold to labs. You know, I hate to say I told you so, but you know, my biggest fear in a lot of that stuff with a lot of these DNA testing websites was initially that how it was stored was very insecure. We were actually using, or it was actually found out years ago, not 23andMe, but through another vendor, that they were storing that information on servers that were spread throughout the world, including, you know, places like China. So you kind of got to wonder where your information is stored, but GDPR really hammers on a lot of those points. It's personal information, how it's stored, how it's used, how it can be disseminated, which is why we do need to take notice, pay attention to it, and then also see how it affects those companies that do business in the EU, because it will be coming. Another one that we had, I'm trying to get to all of them. Have you had any success in farming co-ops or interns? Interesting that you asked that question. So this is a good one, good timing on, you know, not only the talent shortage part, but then also sort of a little bit of a business update for us. We've done relatively nothing with co-ops or interns. This year is a big year for us because we have the availability for internships, of which, you know, most of them will start in May. And then we do have folks that are going to be joining us basically sporadically because of training programs that they're involved in. In addition to that, with our partnership and sponsorship with the CyberPatriot program, we're actually going to be doing some advisement for high school teams in the area. So co-ops, interns, co-ops to a certain extent, just because we're working specifically with a couple universities. Really, we kind of call them the same things, not really co-ops, but they're just kind of interns, and they're going to be focused more on the summer months for us currently. We didn't do it before. We had the capability to do it before. I mean, anybody can really hire interns. Our biggest fear was that we would have interns come in and they weren't going to be able to, really be adequately guided to be able to learn something. So we kind of put the stop on it, even though we could have done them previously. We wanted to make sure that it wasn't just the internship for the sake of checking a box and saying I did an internship with, a cybersecurity company, right? It was going to be more about making sure that folks learned something, and that they could actually put something on their resume that was worthwhile. So we do have internships. Most of them have been developed through colleges and universities that we have pre-existing relationships with. And for us, it's they're actually tasked with specific projects, and they're going to be learning a pretty specific regimen of things for the organization. So it's not just learning how to pen test, but it's really offensive security, and then also what they need to do in terms of working within a threat ops environment, all that good stuff. So another one that we have here: any conferences you recommend or cybersecurity, or any conferences you recommend for cybersecurity newbies, things like Black Hat, DEF CON, etc. Yeah, I mean, Black Hat and DEF CON are a little bit overwhelming. I can tell you which ones not to attend, because I think that's probably a better way to look at it. When you look at the big events, I would wholeheartedly recommend not going to something like RSA if you're new to security. Just the sheer size of that event would probably be enough to make anyone's head explode if they're just starting to get into security. The conference floor space or the exhibit hall space is, I don't know, I think they're each like 7 football fields or something like that, and there's 2 of them, and then they have a bunch of different offshoot areas that anybody can get lost in. I think from a, just sort of an awareness perspective, they're kind of cool. You get to see a lot of new solutions, but you never know if they're actually beneficial for what you're trying to do. Being new, I think the biggest thing that you can do is try to find more local events for you. Things that, like ISSA, there's multiple chapters throughout the United States. They're a little bit more focused on, security, but it's also, they're smaller. So you can do some networking, start to ask some questions, and quite honestly, sometimes even find a mentor that might be able to help you out and give you some pointers on what to focus on. ISSA is a good one. Joining your local InfraGard chapter, they're associated with every major city. Again, a little bit of a networking opportunity. Make sure that you get to meet folks in the area, and then also ask them the same questions. What are you hiring for? What type of training can I get? Any particular groups that I should be involved in the area? Kind of build it out like that. The larger conferences like Black Hat, Black Hat's another one that's going to be a little bit more vendor driven, right? And for somebody that's just getting into the industry, it's probably going to be pretty overwhelming, because you'll have some cool, sexy sessions that you want to be involved in so that you know about them, but you might not fully understand exactly what's going on, and it might be a little bit overwhelming. The same goes for DEF CON. DEF CON's definitely changed over the years. DEF CON used to be, a real hacker convention, and it was small. I mean, I don't want to date myself, but like, even though it's Cupid's Q&A, like speed dating, I mean, different kind of date, but like going back, almost like 20 years, you could go to DEF CON and you'd see the same, 150 people, or it was even less people than that then. but you'd see the same people, and a lot of it was just about sharing ideas and making sure that, you know, people knew and heard about the new things that were going on, and, you know, could be involved in stuff, and a chance to actually work collaboratively. Now, DEF CON's still great. I still usually go to DEF CON every year, but DEF CON's almost like the who can be the weirdest nerd in a conference, right? So you get a lot of good stuff and you still make a lot of good connections, but it's almost a little bit harder because there's more people, right? And it has turned into a little bit of a, you know, a circus freak show. Security is definitely a little bit more of a hot topic right now. So that draws a number of people, but at the same time, it's harder to find the people that you truly want to connect with. With that said, they do have DEF CON groups that are more specific for areas. So like in the Philadelphia area, there's a, you know, 610 group that's basically the DEF CON group for Philadelphia. There's also B-sides groups that, you know, the conferences are smaller and they're usually focused on the actual practitioners. Again, a great place to go to maybe hear about certain things that are hot right now in the industry, but then also do some networking and meet the folks in the areas that have some influence, or, you know, could introduce you or kind of point you in the right direction. So I'd almost say that the large national conferences are not the way to go if you're a newbie, but, you know, starting to attend some of the more regional or local ones to try to help you out. Let's see, more questions. Right. All right. So another one, going back to penetration testing. What was your path for penetration testing? Excuse me, my path is kind of all over the place as far as how I got into security. And it's atypical, but it kind of shows that there's multiple ways to get into, you know, any of the specialties that there may be within security. I was always kind of a, you know, a tinkerer. So I was the kid that, you know, got a new toy and completely took it apart, and the first couple times broke it and couldn't get it back together. And then eventually had to figure out how to get it back together because my parents weren't going to buy me a new one. So I did a lot of that growing up. You know, I also had a computer at a young age. So even though growing up, I didn't want to be like a computer, you know, like an IT person or a computer programmer, which is essentially what, you know, what the options were when I was growing up in the 80s. You know, I always kind of had that drive and just sort of that, you know, to do something a little bit related to technology. Going into college and sort of, you know, even my first year or so, I was actually a little bit more focused on law enforcement, believe it or not. And it wasn't until I took my first real computer science class that I realized that there was something there, and I liked it. So, you know, there was a way to, and computer science back then was computer programming. So I really hadn't done too much more other than some, you know, basic computer programming when I was a kid, and some Pascal, things like that in high school. But this kind of opened up my world a little bit and showed me that, you know, you do have the power to manipulate what a computer does for you and how it's reacting. You can also solve a lot of problems, you know, potentially with technology and people behind the wheel. So it was kind of cool, and it kind of caught on with me and sort of resonated with me. At the same time, you know, I had started down this path of doing something in criminal justice, and I started to have more of this itching or kind of burning feeling that, like, there's crossover there, right? There's the legalities of, you know, kind of the meat space world that we all live in, and then there's this stuff that's developing right now on the internet. That, you know, there's possibly going to be some crossover there, but there really wasn't much in terms of good course material. So I did what any, you know, aspiring security person that doesn't have the material does, and read everything that there was. At the time, it was the Rainbow Series books that the government had put out and put together. So old, outdated material from, you know, the late 70s through the mid part of the 80s about what the government was doing to essentially, you know, protect their own computers, but then also the standards that they had put out for, how other computer systems should be secured. So went through a lot of that, and I just happened to be at the time where a lot of new technology was coming out and a lot of good stuff was being put out in terms of security. It was like 1997 through really 2000. So continued a lot more self-study, and then just happened to find myself in a position actually doing an internship where it wasn't my primary focus, but security was something that was vital important. So I was actually working as a developer intern and then an installation tech for a software company that only sold to the defense and intelligence community. So I found myself doing installations and code changes and modifications and enhancements for organizations like the CIA, the DIA. So for me, it was kind of a on-the-job learning experience of how things needed to be in order to fit within their frameworks and fit within their roles. And that kind of sparked my drive to learn even more. So it's kind of how I continued. I ended up doing another internship where that's what I was focused on for a large computer manufacturer at the time, who, if I want to date myself, they were building their first e-commerce website and security was a concern. So did that, and then from there, kind of got my experience doing penetration testing, because I was writing secure code and building secure transactional websites. I had to go through, and I was actually part of the team that was doing the QA and breaking them, which then kind of catapulted me into doing more broad penetration testing. So I was lucky. I was kind of fortunate in that aspect that I was thrown into that role early on in my career, and was able to transition that into doing it full time and right off the bat. So it's not like I had to work to get into a real penetration testing role or anything like that. It was just a matter of being in the right place, building exactly what needed to be tested, then actually running the test programs or the QA programs against that, and then really sort of jumping up that experience to a whole enterprise type penetration testing. It's kind of a long-winded answer to that. So we just have about 5 minutes left, right? I'm looking at my timer. She's ignoring me, but we have about 5 minutes left. I don't know that there's any other questions. This is kind of hard to scroll through. Any other questions on security? Like I said, it's we're going to continue on this series. Try to keep them relatively short. I don't think that there are any other questions in queue. There are a couple that are via private and said reach out to me, so we can reach out to them later. I guess they don't want to have them broadcast during our Q&A session. But we're going to continue to do this on Wednesdays for the next few weeks. And like I said, there's a couple different things that I'll kick off the conversation with. This one was talent shortage. The next one that I'm going to be doing is going to be focused on tech vendors and some of the relationships that we have. And then other than that, talking about some of the solutions that are out there. So I think that there's one more question that just popped in, actually. Other than IS or IT skills, I just lost it. So skills and certifications, what business knowledge and soft skills do you think are most important for success in an information security career? Listening. I mean, it's kind of like being a good boyfriend, husband, girlfriend, whatever you want to be in your own life. But it's listening to whoever your consumer is, right? It's not always going to be a client. Sometimes it's internal, but I think that's the biggest problem that folks have in information security, is that they don't listen to what the actual problem is. And I think that's kind of in overall IT. So many people want to force their solution or give their opinion on what's going on that we forget that the first part is trying to solve whatever a problem may be. So listening to your customer, making sure that you understand exactly what they're trying to accomplish in their business or that the problem that they're having, and then fitting in your expectation or fitting in your expertise with their expectations. It's probably the biggest soft skill that I see. I mean, presentation skills go a long way, but being able to listen to folks and critically think about what's going on and kind of keep focus of the fact that they're just trying to do a job, and your job is to help them be more secure at it. All right, so I think that's it. We wanted to keep it to 45 minutes. I appreciate everyone joining in today. Like I said, we'll continue to do this over the next couple weeks, probably different topics. I'm sure there would be more questions involved with that, but thank you everyone for joining us today. I appreciate it, and as always, follow up if you have any questions. Thank you.